only 80 arrests this last week during Occupy action, so things must have been quite, not a chance. America rocked to the beat on the street from Frisco to the Big Apple, and we were on the spot in every city, not to mention our weekly chat with the top cat.
Their populism is a populism that appeals to the very worst in people rather than the best. Hatred, fear, xenophobia.
Events in the Occupy movement in America last week started out on the country's East Coast with hundreds of protesters marching over New York City's Brooklyn Bridge, an icon of the city and a National Historic Landmark, to mark the 6-month anniversary of the movement's first protest on the bridge. As we have covered, that protest 6 months earlier was the first large and highly visible clash with the New York City Police Department, resulting in more than 700 arrests. This time, however, the protesters were fewer and no arrests occurred. And more was to come from the revitalized mass movement as the week progressed. In D.C., the Backbone Campaign, a grassroots effort organizing for eviction protection, student debt relief, and other democracy causes, participated in Occupy D.C. Now actions by holding a march called the Student Debt Spectacle, part of its Do Occupy to Bail Out America action. The march was from Freedom Plaza to the United States Department of Education building. The week also saw a National Day of Action for mass transit.
I'm Alan Saley with the Transport Workers Union, TWU Local 100. We're here in front of 2 Broadway, which is an office tower that the MTA pays $63 million a year for. It's got a 49-year lease. The estimated cost of the tower is $4 billion. There's another building the MTA owns across the way in Brooklyn, 370 J Street. That building, the MTA has it for $1 a year. Also another building called 130 Livingston, which is essentially free to the MTA. We're not sure why the MTA wants to spend $63 million for this building over here when it has 2 buildings in Brooklyn that it can use the same office space for free.
These actions occurred in 20 major cities across the U.S. on the anniversary of the 1968 assassination of Dr. King, who, after all, viewed public transit as a civil right. To protest fare hikes and service cuts to mass transit and to call for investment in resources instead of service cuts. 85% of public transit systems have cut services or raised fares, affecting a large segment of the public which can least afford either. In New York, Occupy New York colluded with transit worker union members to change subway gates open. Wall Street profited $1.1 billion in interest payments from the Metropolitan Transportation Authority in 2011 in New York alone. In Boston, the state capitol building was flooded with protesters demanding what they termed transit justice. And on the West Coast in Oakland, a mass transit action took place because $52 million has been cut from the budget for local bus services in the region.
Well, today is April 7th, the kickoff of the Chicago Spring. Today is all about community building. This morning we had over 11 actions from Hyde Park to Rogers Park and everywhere in between. At 1 o'clock, we all got together at Jackson and LaSalle, the headquarters of Occupy Chicago, and we marched through the streets here to Butler Field for an afternoon of workshops, teach-ins, musical acts, and other community building events. Later tonight, we'll have a feast at Congress in Michigan at the Horse. We have enough food to feed 500. And then at 7 o'clock tonight, our General Assembly is moving back outside to bring debate and discussion to the public square, the kind of debate and discussion that doesn't happen in our political system.
April 7th was the official kickoff of Chicago Spring. On this day, Occupy Chicago joined with allies across Chicago for a citywide day of action to highlight the intricate web of injustice rooted in dysfunction of broken political, social, and economic systems. It was a day of interconnection and community mobilization to educate, inspire, and unite. In Tampa, Florida, in America's southeast, The occasion of the Tampa Mayor's State of the City 2012 address was used to protest highly funded draconian ordinance being put in place for the coming Republican National Convention, which the city is hosting in August. Tampa activists charged that the new laws, financed by $50 million in federal funds, destroy constitutional rights to peacefully assemble and address their grievances.
In response to the mayor's speech on the state of the city, our city is in a state of democratic distress. The corporate-sponsored Republican National Convention has given Bob Buckhorn an excuse to alienate our rights as U.S. citizens. This proposed clean zone bill destroys every person's given right to peacefully assemble and speak freely.
$1.18 million has already been spent on video links between ground police and police helicopters. Some used pastel chalk to write their message on the sidewalk. The fire department and city employees arrived and washed all of the perfectly legal messages away.
What's the reason for all the water on the sidewalk?
Oh, we're cleaning off the chalk.
Oh, you washed it off?
Some of it, not all of it.
Yet the movement's characteristic humor shows no sign of fading.
Months.
In New York, with nightly evictions from Union Square by the police, more than 24 occupiers simply moved to the sidewalk outside the Bank of America and Citibank and held a sleepover. It is currently not illegal for a protester to sleep on a sidewalk. There were no arrests. In fact, an eviction theater is held every night in New York's Union Square around midnight, with themes such as "We hide and seek while cops pick up goofy stuff," "The Runaround," "Banker Pirates versus Anti-Bank Ninjas," and a "Who Can Occupy More Parks" contest.
Ladies and gentlemen, you cannot lay on the ground.
All this while the movement comes under extraordinary surveillance by the U.S. federal intelligence and police agencies.
More people on the right and on the left were unified against this bailout of the banks than any time in my life, and anyway, so it was a great opportunity. But the Beltway progressive organizations, instead of taking advantage of that, what I call an Argentina moment, a time to get out in the streets and have pots and pans and shut down the banks and take over businesses, what they did is they said, "Oh well, you know, tough luck. Let's just go get out the vote because everything will be better then." Well, we all know that everything's not better, and so. And the Obama administration early on indicated that they weren't going to be a progressive organization that was really going to deliver on their change we can believe in promises. And so there was a vacuum there. There was a desire for real populism. There was a cause for it, but there was no one taking the mantle and going forward, so that people could rise up or have a conduit for their to channel their discontent. And then of course the Tea Party emerges because nature abhors a vacuum, and their populism is a populism that appeals to the very worst in people rather than the best. Hatred, fear, xenophobia, without offering any real alternatives to the current paradigm or structure. And then and simultaneously, you got people realizing that the Obama administration is really not delivering all they hoped for. After like a cathartic, beautiful moment at the inauguration time, you know, that made me want to hope for something really beautiful to happen. But so then the phenomenon of Occupy emerged, and it captured everybody's imagination. But it kind of got caught up in some things that were draining it of energy. You know, every time the police made a mistake, the institutions made a mistake, Occupy's ranks swelled. But then occupiers started to make a lot of mistakes and, you know, do things that were revealing a kind of a lack of sophistication, I believe, around an understanding of social movement or what it is to not just have protests, but to build power. And this is, this is something that was a carryover because, of course, we didn't have much of a tactical imagination during the Bush administration with all this mouse click activism. But we also can't really. We've also lost track of a tradition of community organizing, and I think that we're in a fascinating moment. Because as Occupy Wall Street became Occupy Everywhere, and then everywhere was trying to become either as, a social service, safety net for the failed actual safety net, or a utopian society, mini society in a park. Of course, that was all doomed to fail, and it lost track of its opportunity to be a center for training and for dialogue, and for all of us to develop political analysis and develop skills, and to listen to each other. So we went through some downtime, I think, in the end of the fall, the winter. A lot of similar issues, debates are rising up in different places. This I think it's a mistake to get caught up in this thing that some people will know what I'm talking about is the the DOT, diversity of tactics versus nonviolence, because it just fails to see the moment and the context that we're in. The principles of grand strategy are to expand alliances and to undermine the alliances of your opponent and to win without sowing seeds for future conflict. That's simplified. But the kind of conflict we're in is not a power against power conflict. It's an asymmetrical power relationship. The state has the capacity for violence and unlimited access to money, and so it's ever more important that we understand that we only win in the realm of moral. We're in a moral conflict.
As the 99ers have continued to exercise their constitutional rights, two particular police actions brought many questions regarding the police conduct to the fore once again.
Occupy Wall Street in Liberty Square, urging to assert your power.
Students attended the trustees meeting at Santa Monica College to protest the school's plan to implement a tuition system at higher costs. The room where the meeting was held, according to school officials, was too small to accommodate the protesters. When the trustees refused to relocate to a larger meeting space, protesters began chanting, "No cuts, no fees, education should be free." That was enough, it appeared, to resort to crowd control. The campus police at Santa Monica College pepper sprayed as many as 30. A spokesman for the college justified the use of pepper spray, saying the crowd was getting out of hand and it was a safety issue. 5 protesters were taken to hospital following the incident, among them a 4-year-old girl. Occupy San Francisco occupied the Archdiocese building to create a community center and appeal to the church with the first banner dropped on entering the building. "Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses." Local residents have confirmed that 888 Turk Street had stood vacant for 5 years and the Archdiocese had misrepresented the building's vacant status for tax purposes. But apparently the church was not amused because around 1 p.m. Pacific time, the Archdiocese announced that they would call on the police to handle the situation. Within 20 minutes of the announcement, a sheriff's bus rolled up in front of the building and a mob of SWAT spilled out. The occupation lasted just under 20 hours. 888 Turk Street was cleared out by SFPD. Over 80 people were arrested. Corporate U.S. media mimicked the church and SFPD tales about the occupation, denigrating protesters as usual. A U.S. Army veteran and somewhat of a hero within Occupy San Francisco was beaten by police for resisting arrest when no such resistance was evident. Police actions have become increasingly erratic and brutal as the 1% begins to realize that the popular protests are not going away anytime soon. A heavy-handed bid to repress the protesters is now evident. The strange thing being that the tactics employed by the 1% mimic those of their despotic glove puppets that rule over parts of the third and developing world. Given the atrocious behavior of these rulers toward their populations, the American patriots are left asking, how far will the U.S. police be prepared to go to put down the protests?
And one of the beautiful things that Occupy and other crises bring to us is an opportunity to pitch in and discover what we can do together. And like my mentor says, Chuck Spinney, amazing guy, he says, opportunity favors the prepared mind. So we were doing 2 days of action, one on eviction protection and principal reduction. Those are 2 parts of a housing-based human rights movement, sub-movement, and another day of action around a very nascent movement for student debt forgiveness and demands for a free higher education. So some of our trainings included organizer trainings from folks who are good at this stuff and deeply into these movements, including City Life Vida Urbana and the amazing group Right to the City. City Life is just, they're really the people who are leading the way and have developed an organizing model for delivering victory on evictions and actually lowering the debt that people have. And then we had folks also from Occupy Student Debt and other experts in higher education. But then, so our actions, but the beautiful thing was the alchemy, the gold that came out of it, besides all the love and networking, alliance building that was happening just by doing the work, is that there was a call that there's a family that was that was facing eviction on yesterday morning. And they called the local Occupy. The local Occupy called us, and we collaborated on an eviction protection blockade at their house yesterday morning. And it was crazy because we'd already made a giant banner that said evictionfreezone.us, because my active thinking is that we should be declaring every community around the country an eviction-free zone, helping people stay in their homes and lower their debt. So we just set that up, and we put the press release for this action that happened yesterday morning on the site. We went there. We were already doing a flash mob around principal reduction, which is the national demand for this community-based movement for universal principal reduction, to take away, to revalue the debt of the mortgages of the folks who have underwater homes where they owe more than the house is worth. So we had a flash mob ready to go. We had a dance routine. We had this giant banner. We had just met with the best people in the country. We had their lawyer down talking to a local Occupy allied lawyer here in Washington, D.C. It was like this incredible mentorship that was going on from the community of Boston to the community of D.C. And really, we're all getting to participate in it. And we'll all take it back to our communities. So gold happened yesterday, and the families actually, they're tenants, which is interesting because it's not just homeowners who are affected by the foreclosure crisis, but they're tenants and they got to stay on their eviction. And in Washington, D.C., they get the opportunity to buy back their home. And so they won. The movers came and the movers went away. Marshals who were in charge of the eviction came and they had to go away. We created an environment where we had the power, and we kept the power. We didn't sacrifice it, and we showed solidarity with each other.